on the scene.
From ABC News, this is a special edition of World News Tonight with David Muir, reporting tonight from Havana, Cuba.
Good evening on this Sunday night. As we come to you from Havana, Cuba, we are here to witness the end of an era after the death of the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. He ruled this island nation for a half-century, supported violent revolution across the globe, and nursed his resistance to the United States to the very end. Here in Havana, a somber mood, this usually lively city eerily quiet in mourning. But in Miami, a much different picture, celebrations in the streets for Cuban families with loved ones who fled Castro's brutal regime. We have visited Havana several times as the Cold War between Cuba and the United States began to thaw, traveling here just this year with President Obama. But tonight, the people of both nations, as you will hear right here, are wondering what happens now. Tonight, all across Havana, we notice the flags at half-staff, the Cubans honoring their longtime leader. And on the streets of the capital, we see the famous vintage cars. But there is something missing here, the music. The Cuban people mourning Fidel Castro, who defied 10 U.S. presidents for half a century.
So, David,
we meet this man named Roy, proud of his '56 Chevy, and even more proud of his leader.
¿Qué piensas sobre un Cuba sin Castro?
He tells us he's already been gone for a long time, that the future now depends on our relationships with other countries, including the U.S.
The road to Havana paved with glory for rebel chieftain Fidel Castro.
Fidel Castro riding into Havana, coming into power at just 32 years old. He kept his grip on power here longer than any national leader other than Queen Elizabeth. Castro born into a wealthy family. They had their own sugarcane plantation. He loved baseball, he loved politics, and he would love power.
Is representative democracy and social justice.
Castro took power on New Year's Day 1959, promising democracy, but soon throwing opponents in jail. There were executions, silencing newspapers, and taking over all U.S. businesses here, signing a pact with the Soviet Union. The U.S. would respond with sanctions, President Kennedy approving the invasion, Cuban exiles entering at the Bay of Pigs. It failed. Castro won. Our Barbara Walters later crossing through the Bay of Pigs with Castro.
Do you feel funny crossing the Bay of Pigs with an American?
With friends America. With friend America.
American friends,
it's
yes.
A friendship relation.
It's a friendly relation. Well, it's a very...
You didn't come here to invade the country.
No, we did not come here to invade.
You came to work and to know Cuba.
America would find itself on the brink of nuclear war in 1962. Discovering Castro had let the Soviets put nuclear missiles in Cuba.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
The Soviets would remove the missiles, but America would deepen the sanctions.
The Monte Carlo of the Americas.
The nightclubs, the casinos, so popular with American tourists, were shuttered. Decades later, 11 million people live here in Cuba, making just $20 a month. By some estimates, just 5% have internet access in their homes. We have seen it in our reporting here. The grocery store shelves far from what you see in the U.S. Sugar plentiful here, but most of the powdered milk, for instance, from New Zealand. She pulls tomato juice from the shelf.
This is tomato juice from Spain.
But just this year, President Obama, the first U.S. president to visit Cuba since Calvin Coolidge, those old cars in the shadow of Air Force One. He would come here after moving to restore diplomatic relations, and our exclusive interview with the president during his visit.
Mr. President, we're meeting Cuba.
How about that?
I asked if you'd be visiting Cuba before the end of your presidency, and you said, let's see how things evolve.
Right.
So why now?
The time is right. Obviously, our intention has always been to get a ball rolling, knowing that change wasn't going to happen overnight.
The president this year saying there are still significant differences around human rights and individual liberties. But we met two 15-year-olds here today, and we asked them, are they looking forward to the possibility of new freedoms here?
¿Le gustaría más libertades para la gente?
They tell us they are happy the way they are.
A mass gathering is expected right here in the next 24 hours to honor Fidel Castro.
This is what's called the Plaza of the Revolution, and the Cuban people will be allowed to come here and sign a solemn oath saying that they still believe in the concept of the revolution. This is where Fidel Castro would famously address the Cuban people for hours. And on the streets here, we notice something else, the American tourists. There are now more of them here than there have been in decades. This group from California. What do you hope now for the Cuban people?
I hope to see them have a better life, be open, more open and more happy and experience more and be able to travel outside of the Cuba and see other people and see how other people live and enjoy life a little bit more, right?
So you're all from Texas?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
Houston.
So you're all from Texas?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
Houston.
And this group here from Rice University in Texas, they're here to watch baseball, the Americans against the Cubans. They got in some baseball, but the rest of the games have been canceled. They tell me they understand why. What are your hopes for the Cuban people now?
I hope that we can continue to have good relations with Cuba, because I think that's what the people have indicated to us that they want.
Meantime, a short flight from here in South Florida tonight, there is jubilation. Thousands of Cuban Americans taking to the streets after the passing of the dictator, who sent more than 1 million of his own people into exile, separating families and denying them the right to return. Tonight, it is giving many of them hope that change will come. I was in Miami last night, one young woman telling me that her grandmother was celebrating the news, saying they can now hope they will be able to visit their loved ones who are still here in Cuba. ABC's Wjla Benitez with many of those families in Miami tonight.
Tonight, the sounds of celebration in Little Havana. Shouts of freedom from Cuban exiles and their descendants. A 3-day party, young and old, banging pots, pans, celebratory cigars, and champagne uncorked in the hope of a free Cuba.
I'm not happy because somebody died. Death. It's not about that. It's about that we see the future changing.
Cubans in Miami consider the Castro family a reign of terror, one still in power.
Raul Castro has things in place. The repression continues. The lack of freedom continues. So no, it won't be an overnight thing at all.
Castro's death has exiles reflecting. Miami-Dade Commissioner Rebecca Sosa was just 8 years old when she fled Cuba. Her mother and father, political prisoners. She remembers waving goodbye to her dad.
What was going through your mind during that moment? I mean, you were so young.
That is what hurt so much. When I felt that I was not going to see him anymore. That was very hard, and I was very small.
Her father got out of the Cuban prison and got her this champagne bottle with a clear message.
Open only when Fidel dies.
And Wjla Benitez is with us live tonight from Little Havana in Florida. And Wjla, you've heard from so many families there. You've witnessed the jubilation yourself, but what is their main hope moving forward?
Well, David, they just want to see a free Cuba. They don't want to move back to the island. America is home, David.
Wjla Benitez with us tonight. Gio, thank you. Fidel Castro sparking heated controversy, even about the reaction to his own death. President Obama accused tonight of being too easy on Castro in his official statement. President-elect Trump with the sharpest of words for the fallen dictator. ABC's Jonathan Karl at the White House tonight.
Donald Trump greeted Fidel Castro's death as good news, at first issuing a simple tweet, "Fidel Castro is dead," punctuating the fact with an exclamation point. Hours later, he elaborated with a statement calling Castro a brutal dictator whose legacy is one of firing squads, theft, unimaginable suffering, poverty, and the denial of fundamental human rights. From President Obama, a much different response, offering, quote, condolences to Fidel Castro's family. The president made no direct mention of Castro's long record abusing human rights, instead saying, quote, history will record and judge the enormous impact of this singular figure on the people and the world around him. The difference is not surprising. After all, it was Obama who reopened ties with Cuba and Trump who said he might undo that move.
We will cancel Obama's one-sided Cuban deal.
But Trump's latest statement made no such threat.
And Jonathan Karl joins us live tonight from the White House. And John, any indication that President-elect Trump will move, in fact, to reverse President Obama's Cuba policy once he's sworn in?
David, President-elect Trump, as president, could remove that policy with a stroke of a pen. It seems more likely that he will pressure the Cuban government for concessions on human rights. Meanwhile, President Obama and President-elect Trump continue to talk regularly, including a phone call yesterday that the Trump team says lasted 45 minutes. David?
Jonathan Karl at the White House tonight. John, thank you. Any possible change from the White House is introducing uncertainty into relations between the U.S. and Cuba. It was just this past March that President Obama, as you saw, and the Cuban President Raul Castro marked closer ties with the president's visit here. Since then, Cuba has welcomed a growing number of American tourists, and American businesses have stepped up their plans, hotels, airlines. ABC's Jim Wjla on what's at stake right now.
A Sunday afternoon game of dominoes on the porch in Havana. Bars and nightclubs closed for the Cubans until after the funeral. The visitors have noticed.
Missing all the music, which we know is like part of such a big part of the culture.
Tourism up 12% in the first half of this year. Starting Monday, American Airlines flies from Miami, United from Newark, and Delta from Atlanta, bringing the total number of direct flights to more than 100. Fidel's death unlikely to cool the warming relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. But the freeze could come from the north if President-elect Donald Trump follows through on that campaign warning.
We will cancel Obama's one-sided Cuban deal made by executive order if we do not get the deal we want and the deal that people living in Cuba and here deserve.
This Havana family watching special programming today on Cuban TV.
Alerta en ese sentido.
They say they're on alert because of Trump's hard-line statements.
And Jim Wjla is with us here tonight. You've covered Cuba for decades now, and we've spent much of these last 2 years here together. I heard from so many people on the streets here today that they have uncertainty when it comes to President-elect Trump and whether or not that will halt what they've already seen here.
What's fascinating, David, is the death of Fidel Castro, not very much to do with any change that goes forward. He's viewed here as a grandpa, an old man who didn't really have much to do with their daily lives. But Donald Trump, they're watching very closely. They're on alert, they say, to see what changes he could make, and he could do it with a sweep of the pen.
All right, Jim Wjla here in Havana. Jim, always great to be by your side. In the meantime, we do turn to other news this Sunday evening. The move to conduct recounts now back in the U.S. in several battleground states. It's going forward now. Green Party candidate Jill Stein raising more than $6 million now. Hillary Clinton's campaign tonight saying they will participate in the process as she nears the 2 million mark in the popular vote. President-elect Trump is now blasting this move on Twitter. ABC's Tom Yamas tonight.
Tonight, President-elect Trump, who won in the Electoral College but trails Hillary Clinton by nearly 2 million in the popular vote, sending this stunning tweet. I won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally. A baseless claim, and Trump providing no proof. It comes as he rails against the Rust Belt recount. Green Party candidate Jill Stein forcing a recount in Wisconsin, and now Hillary Clinton's campaign joining the effort, which could expand to Michigan and Pennsylvania. Clinton lost those 3 states by just over 100,000 votes. It's unlikely a recount would change that. Trump himself spent months warning the election would be tainted.
It's a rigged election, believe me. And we know it's a rigged system.
1.8 million dead people are registered to vote.
Now it's Clinton's lawyer, who says the campaign has been bombarded with supporters, quote, urging us to do something, anything, to investigate claims that the election results were hacked. Team Clinton says it's joining the recount to ensure the process proceeds in a manner that is fair to all sides. But they concede their own investigators have not uncovered any actionable evidence of hacking or outside attempts to alter the voting technology. Trump says Clinton should stand by her own words.
We must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president.
He calls the recount effort a Green Party scam to fill up their coffers, adding, so much time and money will be spent, same result, sad. And David, Donald Trump also focused on building his cabinet. The big battle right now, Mitt Romney versus Rudy Giuliani for the Secretary of State spot. Kellyanne Conway, Trump's campaign manager, coming out hard against Romney, saying he went out of his way to hurt Donald Trump during the primary season. David?
Tom Yamas, who anchors this newscast on the weekends. Tom, our thanks to you as well.